Hello, 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 everyone. It's Dr. Tamara Beckford, and welcome to the Dr. Tamara Beckford Show. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic that unfortunately all of us will have to face. We're talking about facing death and all that really matters. Facing death and all that really matters. Alrighty. So, for those of you who are new to me, Dr. Tamara Beckford, frontline battling burnout, but I have this wonderful show where I get to interview all my physician friends. We are over 250 interviews right now, and I have one of the best that's here today that has stopped by to tell us all about his journey. Alrighty, so let's get this party started, right? Now, let's talk about this. When you're facing death and all that really matters, like who do you want on your side, right? What's going through your mind? What if you had to face this all the time? You're going to pull out, like, from today, some of the things that we learn along that journey and what this special doctor has learned along and what he's going to impart with all of us today, right? So let me bring him in and your caring docs fashion. We don't just drop you here. We make sure that you get the build up. So this wonderful doctor that stopped by today is a graduate of Tulane University School of Medicine. Shout out to all my New Orleans. Hello, hello, hello. He did his internal medicine residency at UT Southwestern. So shout out to all my Texans. Then most of my doctors don't stop there. And so did this doc. He did a fellowship in pulmonary and critical care medicine and lung transplant. So pulmonary, critical care, and lung transplant. And he did that at the University of Colorado. He's a former director and Center of Advanced Lung Disease and Lung and Heart Transplant Program at Stanford University School of Medicine. He is currently the principal of the Weill Consultant Group, focusing on improving the delivery of pulmonary, ICU, and transplant care. Now, if this name sounds familiar, this is probably why. He's been featured on the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, CNN, you might have seen him there, on Fox, the Doctors TV, and the New York Times. And most recently, he's dropped his second book. And what is it called? All That Really Matters. Who am I talking about? The one and only Dr. David Weill. Hello, Dr. Weill. How are you?
Thank you for having me. And I don't think I've ever had as nice an introduction as that, or as an enthusiastic one. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I love it. All my doc and all our colleagues, we're all rock stars. So I'm like, we get rock star introductions. Alrighty. So let's bring everybody along on this journey, Dr. Weill. Starting at the beginning. When did you decide, you know what? I want to be a doctor. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it was pretty young for me. I come from a medical family. My dad was a doc. My mom's a nurse. I started rounding with in the hospital with my father on Saturdays when I was a little kid. I was that guy that was just sitting in the back while my father was usually grilling the residents. And I started working in a hospital when I was 14 and worked all the way through high school, college, and beyond. And then the career kind of went. So I've always wanted to be a doctor. I know it sounds cliche, but that's
no. We have a couple colleagues that did, same journey. But what was your first job in the hospital at 14? Tell us all about that.
Well, I was an orderly back then, and I don't even know if they have orderlies anymore. I was responsible for wheeling people around the hospital in New Orleans. I would prep them for surgery late at night. I would run labs here and there. I would find X-rays for the doctors. I would do really anything they wanted me to do. And I worked a 3 p.m. to 11 shift. And
nice.
My fellow orderlies were some real characters from New Orleans. So I enjoyed that maybe as much as anything else.
I love it. So you were really you were like glue, that in-between glue where, because if we think about it, people, you need to go to surgery and you're in your room. The operating room is on the other side of the hospital. How are you going to get there? That was back then. That was David. All righty, David, come and get us.
Yeah,
Now, the
I would
doctor.
actually, hey, I
Yeah,
just sorry to interrupt, but I would actually come and
yeah.
pick up some patients on the stretcher at age 14, and more than one patient said, "I hope you're not the doctor."
And you're like, well, I've been watching Doogie Howser, so I got this.
Right.
I can imagine. Love it, love it, love it. So yeah, you were the in between before they have the tube system where they're shooting the labs up to, from the patient's bedside up to the labs. We had David running and getting all the stuff and getting those results, getting the x-rays. So back then, right? X-rays that we put up and look at the screen,
Right.
the ones that we did this, that was you making sure that all of that gets done. So you were in between. All righty.
Yeah.
So now you did all of that. And despite being in the hospital consistently, you decided, you know what? Yes, I still want to do medicine. So got into medical school, and there are a plethora of specialties. Yeah. Before I get into that, what type of medicine did Dad do?
He was a lung doctor.
So did you go in say like, alrighty, I'm gonna be doing this, or did you like say, okay, you know what? I'm here. I'm very interested in lung medicine, but I'm gonna keep my eyes and options open. Tell us.
I didn't really keep my options much open. I'm the most boring guest you've ever had, but no, basically my father was a research scientist. He was a lung physician, but did not see patients, was a research physician. So the only original idea I've ever had was to be a clinical doctor. And so I did some research, not a lot, much to the chagrin of my bosses at Stanford, but I was mostly a clinical doctor. So I was a different kind of doctor than my father was.
I love it. The bedside. You wanted to be there. Alrighty. So I wanted to give a quick hello. We're having Ron Thomas listening from Dubai. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. We're going to get some really, really, really great info from Dr. Weill. So letting you know, Dr. Weill, over in Dubai, they're listening to you right now. All right. So now, your dad was a lung doctor, a scientist. You were interested in medicine. You kept that interest despite running around the hospital and helping us at those early age. And then, went into med school, wanted to be a lung doctor. Did you want to be a lung scientist also? Or did you immediately say, no, I got the bug. I want this bedside work?
No, I did not want to be a scientist. Not many doctors, I suppose, admit to this, but I wasn't particularly good at science or science courses for that matter.
Just had the drive.
I really wanted to be a doctor. So a clinical doctor. So I kind of got through the first 2 years of medical school. I don't know how, but I just kind of had to get through it. And then I think the third and fourth year is when I really started to really engage with the field. Got to see patients, and that's really what turned me on.
Yes, because it's that connection. It's the shine. So you looked at the first 2 years and like, okay, I see the rainbow coming, but I just got to get through this so that you can get through that connecting with the patients. Alrighty. So let's talk about that first patient connection, because it seems like that's where you thrive. And, getting through pharmacology, microhistology, and all the other stuff for the first 2 years. And then you finally got to that patient bedside. Like, how was that for you?
I think it was amazing. And it also brought me back to the time when I was much younger working in the hospitals. I mean, I just like talking to patients. I still do. I don't do it as much anymore, but I still do. I think catching people at their most vulnerable period is a meaningful experience. It informs a lot of the way I look at the world, and it informs a lot of the way I write about the world. So I think it's a meaningful thing. I'll cherish it forever.
Love it, love it, love it. Alrighty, so there you are. Now, you went in saying that you wanted to be a lung doctor. The road, it takes a while because you have to get through general, which is the internal medicine residency, before you can get to the fellowship and which is all that. Were there any period of time when you said, no, I'm gonna just stop right here?
No, I don't think so. I was lucky in that lung transplant was on the ground floor when I started. So when I was training in Colorado, Denver was starting a lung transplant program at the time. This is in the early 90s. It's still a relatively new field at that point.
Absolutely.
And so I got in it on the ground floor. And once I found transplant, I wouldn't want to do anything else. For me, it was, the shot in the arm. I spent my entire career never having to set an alarm clock to get out of bed, never wondering, why do I have to go to the hospital today? I ran to the hospital. I was pretty enthusiastic about it.
Wow. So that's now someone who is on the outside. And, like my friend Ron, who is watching from Dubai. So Ron is not in medicine, very enthusiastic and loves to, learn about what are some of the things that we go through. He likens it, he does like international work with like the high level people. So what would you say to somebody like that? Like, describe what lung transplant is and how you help to keep those people alive.
Well, I think what's interesting about transplantation in general is it's the ultimate reset. So a patient gets a second chance at life. They face death for the first time. If everything works out, they get a second chance at life. And that's a rare opportunity to talk to people that get that second chance. But the thing that I tell a lot of different audiences is I think it's important for patients, especially people outside of medicine, to understand what's going on behind the scenes when they're getting care, especially complex care like transplant. I mean, it's the ultimate team sport. I mean,
absolutely.
We had 60 people on our team at Stanford. And, my job, sometimes easy, sometimes hard, was to try to get those people to all pull in the same direction. And that, that's difficult. There are egos involved, mine included. And there's, times when the interests don't align.
Right.
And what patients, especially after reading my first book and some about my second book, are so surprised to learn is that, while we're delivering this care, we're actually human beings. I mean, there's stuff that's going on in our lives too. We're having a fight with our spouse, or we got cut off in traffic on the way to work, or something else is going on, or one of our parents is sick, which happens as well. And I think patients sometimes have a tendency to look at us as robots. One of the things that I've tried to do with my writing is to get rid of that stigma. We're not robots. We're human beings delivering very complicated care.
Now, I love the fact that we talk about us not being robots, especially in healthcare. There are times where we get like either placed on a pedestal or shut down on the pedestal, just depending on the perspective, but overall, when you look at the trajectory of most of us in medicine, we went in on a calling knowing that, number one, it was going to take a very long time before we get to do the part that we truly want, just like you said. Like, science, I battled through it so that I can get to the patient care part, right? And even with that, like, you still kept on going to learn more. And whoa, I learned even more. And wow, I'm really, really passionate about this part. So there are things that goes on in our lives, but we end up with a period in our lives where there's a lot of blinders on, where it's just zoned, you're just zoned in. And the zone is for, I can't wait to be able to help that person. As you mentioned, with this non-robotic portion of our lives, even while we zoned in, we still have a lot of loss that we encounter to get to that point, right? There's some friendships that we lose along the way because that person just didn't understand. There might be some, romantic encounters that we've lost along the way because why can't you call me back? Well, it's 16 hours and I'm still stuck here and I'm sorry I can't, right? So we lose things along the way, and it's all in the sense because we really want to do this thing, which we've worked so hard for. But as you are mentioning and you're bringing light, when we talk about all that really matters, like, what is it that you want these people to know about all that really matters during this time when they're getting this care delivered to them?
Well, I think a lot of things that I've learned, and it really has been an education. I know it's cliche to say that, but it's
No, but
actually
it's life, right? Life's a continuous education.
it's amazing how much the patients taught me. And one thing that they did teach me,
Mm-hmm.
and as I was trying to title my second book with my publisher and so forth, we're trying to figure out what the main character is really, what are they after? And
Mm-hmm.
somebody in the room, not me, I'm terrible at titling the books I write. Um, Well, I think Dr. Joe Bosco, the main character in the book, is trying to figure out all that really matters to his life in his life. And I said, well, why don't we just call it all that really matters then? And it got me thinking about the patients. I had
Mhm.
this kind of signature question that I would ask patients that were being evaluated for transplant. Every
Mhm.
single patient I met, probably thousands over the course of 25 years. And I would ask, what would you do if today was your last day?
Mhm.
And I didn't really much care how they answered it. What I did want them to do, though, is get talking.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to talk about the things that mattered most to them. And what they
Mhm.
told me was actually inspiring because,
Mhm.
some of them just, they wanted to chase their grandkids around, or they wanted to, play more golf, or they wanted to hike, or they wanted to do whatever. And those were all fine answers. Not one of them, though, told me, I want to go out and work some more, and I want to actually be more successful in life and make more money. Not one told me that. And it got me thinking about my own priorities, because sometimes they get a little screwed up.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it got me thinking about that. And I've talked to audiences about this before. I think that there's 3 F's, that
Mhm.
matter. And for me, it's easy to always remember. I'm a medical student at heart, so mnemonics are really important to
Yes,
me.
sir.
And the 3 F's are friends, family, and faith. And
Mhm.
so for me, I think the family and the friends connection is really easy to understand. And when I've struggled most in life, I get disconnected from my family or friends. That's happened to me.
Mhm.
The faith is a little, more difficult to explain, because some people, they don't believe in formal religion, or they don't believe in God, or they don't, faith to me is a very broad term. It doesn't necessarily mean formal religion. It means a spirituality of sorts.
Mhm.
So whenever in my life I've gotten disconnected from any of those 3 F's, I've struggled. And I'll
Mm.
my first book, when I made the decision to step away from clinical medicine, that was exactly what was going on. I
Mhm.
disconnected from all three of those things.
From all three?
All three.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about that. Because I mean, we're talking now about the second book, but I mean, this is all based on this journey that you've been on. How would you say that you ended up dropping the ball? Let's just call it, because we're there juggling, right? Those 3 F's: the family, friendship, and faith. And like we said, sometimes we get that blinders. Was it because of the blinders?
I think so, and actually it kind of, those 3 F's kind of inform both of my books. One's a
Mhm.
memoir and one's fiction, but my main character is struggling with some of the same things. And
Mhm.
I think what happened to me at the end of my clinical career was I was basically unable to really have patients die anymore and be able to deal with it. It was
Yes.
compassion fatigue, empathy depletion, however you want to phrase it.
Mhm.
But the reason I couldn't keep doing it anymore is I didn't have the anchor that I'd
Mhm.
had earlier in my career, where I stayed connected to the people that mattered most to me, where I had a faith practice.
Mhm.
And I'd made the decision, very difficult decision. I theoretically was at the top of my game, and I decided in 2016 to step away from clinical medicine and begin a second chapter in my professional life.
Mhm.
And I grieved after I did that, because I was giving up something that was important
Mhm.
to my own identity. And it
Absolutely.
was very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine, because as we talk about, there's the work that you do to get there, but then, like as you mentioned, there's this identity that's associated with it, right? Now, I love it here. If we just think about this for a second, like my title, if you're looking on the screen, it says Dr. Tamara Beckford, but you just put up David Weill, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to say that you no longer identify, but it's not that like closely connected. So when you introduce yourself to people, what do you introduce yourself as?
Well, that's a very astute point of yours. My first book was a memoir about a transplant physician at Stanford, and the book was by David Weill, MD. When I wrote this novel, it was by David Weill. I'm slowly broadening out my identity to include other things, and I think it's a process. For many, many, many years, decades, when I looked in the mirror every morning, I didn't see even husband or father. I saw transplant doctor. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's honestly what I saw. And I think now what I'm trying to do is access other aspects of myself and identify as such. So when I've introduced myself and when I talk to folks and do interviews like this, I'm David Weill. I'm not David Weill, MD, and I don't go by Dr. Weill anymore. And I as soon as people call me that, I'm like, David will work fine. So
I love it. So you broaden this scope of your identity, of who you are, and that, and I don't want to use the word, I'm using the word compartmentalize in it, but it's not in a way that I've just blocked it. It's just that I've have opened up access and just realized that that is that part of me. And it's just a part of the whole. It is not the whole itself. It's a part of the whole that is David Weill.
Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, even for your listeners, and I know that at times you've talked about burnout, and I'm sure you've had listeners that have left the field, and I get a lot of messages from folks that want to leave the field, which saddens me. I think if you only identify as a doctor or nurse, and you decide to leave the field, then what are you left with is the self-identifying aspect. And I think that we should all, even while we're working in the clinical arena, maybe broaden out how we identify a little bit so that that post-clinical period, that post-doctor, post-nurse period won't be as painful as it was for me for a couple of years after I left.
Wow, I can imagine that journey. It's like a journey of self-discovery, rediscovery, which now, when you liken that to the patients that you asked them, if this were your last day on earth, what would you do? What was your answer? Because your grieving period is a liken to that. Like, this is my last day as Dr. David Weill, lung transplant surgeon in that thing. Like, were you ever able to answer that question for yourself?
I think so. One thing that I did when I left Stanford is I got a legal pad out and made a little chart. And on one side of the chart, I said things that I do poorly and I don't like doing, and I listed those. And I decided right then I'm not doing those anymore.
Wow.
And then things that I do well that I don't like, I'm not doing those anymore. The things that I do well and that I like, I'm going to do those, and I'm only going to do those. And that's kind of how I've led my life. And the things that I like and that I think I do well relate to my consulting business. I think that I'm not a finished writer, but I'm in my residency. My career, I'm getting better. Hopefully, I'm not hurting any readers along the way like I did when I was a resident, but I'm getting better. And so I want to focus on the relationships that matter most to me now. I don't want to focus on the things that I consider time wasters. I had a big birthday a couple of months ago, and I feel the clock running a little bit. And I wanted to make sure that as I turn the big 6-0 and move forward, I was doing the things that I felt like I could do pretty well and make a contribution and that I like doing. I think right now, many of us have spent some time doing a lot of things that we don't like doing as much. And medicine is actually more than ever filled with things that physicians and nurses don't like doing anymore.
Absolutely. It's like a strength finder, but it's a strength finder for life, right? It's your life finder where you delineated things. Now, there are a lot of people who have the things that I'm not good at that I do not like to do. that's easy to wipe off, right? Things that you're good at that you do not or no longer want to do. How did you get through that part? Because that's where that mental fortitude and strength comes in.
Well, it's a realization, I think, and you've had this in your career, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Folks have asked you to do things because you're good at them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you keep saying yes to them. I did.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized I didn't really like doing it. I'm just doing them because people think I'm good at it. And I just, they were asking me to do them. No, Steve Jobs said this. I didn't make this up. No is the most important word in our vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had trouble with that. I still have a little trouble with it. People ask me to do things and I want to do them, even if if I don't really like doing them. And I think that we all have to develop a stronger no muscle. And I think that particularly in medicine, when we're training, we just want to be yes, 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 salute, and go on. And I don't think that that works so well for our emotional health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now you talk about the burnout and you alluded to that. And that's one thing that, we talk a lot about on here and that I talk a lot about on social media. Well, I'm going to first ask, have you been burned out?
I think so. I struggle with the term a little bit because I've talked to enough people, especially after my first book came out, where I was clearly describing a situation of burnout. I've talked to a lot of groups about it and a lot of people individually about it that are in the clinical arena. And I think burnout is a very catch-all phrase. I think it's so different for different people, means different things to different people. It's like saying, well, I have a car. It doesn't tell you what kind of car, what model or make. I think burnout, to me, in my initial understanding of it, was a mental health issue for the practitioner. I don't think that anymore. I actually think that it's a reflection of the hospital ecosystem and the clinical ecosystem and the healthcare ecosystem in our country. I think the job's untenable for most people in medicine right now. I talk to tons of nurses and I talk to tons of doctors and all of the work that I do. And all I hear from all of them is, I want to do that part that's magic, that piece of the pie chart, but they won't let me. They fill me up with all this other crap. I hope I can say that on your show.
Yes,
All this other stuff, and they've lost the magic. And so is that burnout, or is that just a reflection of the environment in which we work? I think it's the latter.
I think that there is a sector, a huge sector that has, I call it, they've sucked that energy out of us. And even that the term burnout, yes, it has the psychological response to chronic workplace stress. And yeah, that stress, that workplace stress they talk about, is putting water on that magical fire. It's just extinguishing it. It's
That's a good way.
extinguishing it.
That's a great way to phrase it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you got into that zone of that spectrum of burnout, what did it look like for you? Like, what were some of the things that you noticed in your life?
Irritability, insomnia. I wanted to do everything in the hospital quickly so that I could get out of the hospital.
Yes.
That was not like me. I started really going through the motions. But here's the one that I think is the number one characteristic of burnout is isolation.
Yeah.
I think what we do is we lose the connectedness to our colleagues. And I certainly had that at Stanford. We become isolated from our work colleagues, yes, but we also become isolated from our friends and family, and sometimes our faith.
Yes.
And I think once that isolation occurs, you have to recognize it, because if you don't, it's not going to get better, and it's going to be a struggle. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And the isolation, I don't feel like it's a night and day thing. It's like you slowly start to it's severing bonds, but it's not intentional. severing bonds, but you're severing bonds nonetheless. And you slowly, it's like you're snipping away on one follicle at a time. And by the time you look, this entire part is shorter.
I think
Right?
you're right. I think it's a defense mechanism. I think you're trying to separate yourself from something that's hurting you.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt. I literally was mad at transplant.
Yeah.
The last couple of years I was at Stanford, I was mad at the field, as if the field
Did something to you.
Yes. I mean, and what's been great is I was angry at my lover, but I fell back in love again.
Yes. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that got you back in love? And I'm going to say, is part of that being able to control the way you have that relationship with this thing that you love?
Definitely. And it's an exposure issue.
Mhm.
It goes back to the legal pad.
Mhm.
I basically now do the things that I'm good at and the things that I like. And that's my exposure to transplant. I help transplant programs perform better. I work with companies that are in the transplant space. These are
Mhm.
things I like and I feel like I'm pretty good at. Um, I've separated myself from the things in the field that I don't want to do anymore.
Mhm.
And then maybe I really wasn't that great at, I mean,
Mhm.
handling imperfection, handling death. I mean, maybe I
Mhm.
was never great at that, and,
Mhm.
I don't do that anymore. Uh,
Nice.
so I love the field. I think about it every day. I haven't seen a transplant, recipient, somebody that's received a transplant in a little while, but I love the field. I talk to transplant doctors, nurses, social workers. I talk to transplant patients who find me and just want to, shoot the breeze about the process.
Mhm.
I love the field. I think it's an important area of medicine, and I want to contribute to it till I can't anymore.
It's a joy seeing that rekindled passion because during this interview so far, the first part that you had that same drive and the energy that you're giving off was when we talked about what made you decide to do medicine. And you're like, oh, and I was rounding and sitting in the back. And as an orderly pushing patients around, I felt that joy come through. That same joy, I'm feeling it coming through right now.
Yeah, it's been an amazing run. I mean, what can you say?
Mhm.
I've had let's call it a 50-year, 40-year experience with medicine, and I would
Mhm.
say about two of them have been not so good. That's not
Right.
bad.
No,
That's not
the
bad.
odds are
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. I'll
And but
take
the
that.
thing is, during that 2 or so year period, that was you finding this version of yourself, right?
One door was closing, another one opened.
Yeah, an emerged version. All right. So now let's talk about my fun question of the day.
Should I be scared?
No, I always build it up as if you should. So, if you weren't a doctor and author, you're not pushing people around and being a go-to person and research scientist, which I know you weren't going to do anyway.
No, no one would want me to do that.
Or you weren't a consultant group doing anything in lung transplant, what would you be?
I'd work in a bike shop.
Oh,
Um, I love bikes. I like riding them. I like looking at them. I like reading about them. I like everything about them. I think it's such a childlike experience to ride a
mhm.
bike. So I think I'd either work in a bike shop and maybe one day work up to owning a bike shop. I think that's
Love it.
yeah.
You're actually my first doctor that has the bike shop. Now, okay, so I'll now give you the plot behind this question. I have this utopia of doctors, all my doctor friends, where we all have these magical jobs, which are yours is the bike shop. I have the forest ranger. So I'm thinking I can use, yeah, they can they get the bike shop, and everyone's now in the forest. We have our We have nature photographers. We have the travel photographer, travel journalist. So I'm putting you in those categories where we're making like this nice magic. And it all starts with stopping by Dave's. Is it going to be Dave's Bike Shop?
That works.
All right, cool. Stopping by Dave's Bike Shop. Alrighty. So there are many people who are loving and watching this great interview and conversation, how I like to style it as a conversation. And they wanted to know more about David Weill. They want to know more. Where can they find you? Where can they find your books? Where can they find you as a consultant? They know someone who's probably looking for something that you're doing here and or abroad. Let us know, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Who was the rapper that said I ain't hard to find?
Right?
I can't remember who it is. Anyway,
Yeah.
So David Weill,
Mhm.
WEILL.com, pretty much has it all.
Nice.
I also am pretty active on social media, and my handle is pretty easy. Also at David Weill, MD this time.
Oh,
And so at David Weill, MD on all the social media platforms.
love it, love it, love it. Is there something that you have under your sleeve coming out that we should know about?
I do. I'm under contract and busily writing a third book. I'm going to mostly 90% leave medicine and write this time about identity, and especially about religious identity, something that I've struggled with in the past and also really interested in. So that book will be out in late 2025.
Okay.
The good Lord willing.
Yes, yes. Looking forward to that book. Looking forward to reading and learning more about David Weill. So if you are watching and this has definitely piqued your interest, this is just the beginning. So you have to catch David before he opens up his bike shop and gives up all this other stuff.
It's going to be a little while. So.
It's going to be a little while. All right. So we have some time. We have some time. Thank you so much, Dr. Weill, for stopping by the Dr. Tamara Beckford Show and really taking us on this journey of yours, telling us, starting from this young kid that's watching your dad in medicine to your journey of being on the ground level to medicine and then being at what you thought at the time was the top of your game. And then now bringing yourself to another mountaintop, which is impacting those in the lung transplant space from your other portion. So not directly with your hands on, but with this mind and this beautiful mind that you have to be able to help others. And also taking us on some of those journeys, both fiction and nonfiction. So thank you so much, Dr. Weill. Is there any last minute word that you have for our audience before we close this conversation?
No last words, but thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, Doc.
Love it, love it, love it. All righty. Thank you so much. Now, I know how some of you guys are. You're like, oh, I jumped in on this conversation and I heard the very, very last part. But I'm like, have no fear. This wonderful conversation will be available on our Your Caring Docs website. Just go to urcaringdocs.com. Select podcast. You see that handsome man right there? Yes. Click and download the episode. Send it to 5 of your friends. And you're like, who's Absolutely. Now, if you're looking for a dynamic speaker to speak on stress and burnout prevention, definitely I am the person for you. Go to that same website, yourcaringdocs.com. Click on that link that says work with me and we'll make this happen. For my ladies out there, if you're dealing with stress and burnout, we have a wonderful Thrive program that we have going on. We're filling it up fast. It's a 6-week burnout prevention program, and I would love to be able to have you ladies as a part of this. All righty. Well, with all of that, we are going to say goodbye for today, and we will see you guys on another wonderful conversation on this Dr. Tamara Beckford Show next time. Bye-bye.